The day my daughter-in-law said, "We didn't save a seat for your mom," while her family dined like royalty without me, something inside me shattered in a way I never imagined possible. I stood there outside that bustling Manhattan restaurant, watching through the frosted glass as they laughed and celebrated my son's birthday. The winter wind cut through my warm wool coat like a knife through my heart. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Margaret, and I'm 72 years old. I live in a small one-bedroom apartment in Queens, where the radiator clanks like an old ghost and the smell of Mrs. Chen's cooking from next door reminds me daily of the meals I used to prepare for a family that no longer wants me. Every morning, I wake up to the sound of the subway rumbling beneath my building, a constant reminder that life moves on whether you're part of it or not. The walls of my apartment are covered with photographs. Pictures of my son David when he was 5, gap-toothed and grinning, holding a homemade birthday cake I'd spent hours decorating. Pictures of his wedding day, where I stood proudly next to him in my best dress, the navy blue one with pearl buttons that I'd saved for months to buy. Pictures of my grandchildren, Emma and Jake, when they still ran to me with open arms and called me Grandma Maggie with pure joy in their voices. But that morning, the morning after the restaurant incident, those pictures felt like museum pieces from a life that belonged to someone else. I sat at my small kitchen table, the one I'd bought at a garage sale 15 years ago, holding a cup of coffee in my trembling hands. The envelope with David's birthday invitation lay torn on the table, not torn by me, but by the harsh reality that I had never actually received it. You see, I had called David 3 days before his birthday. The phone rang, and finally, his wife Jessica answered. Her voice was different that day, distant and cold, like she was speaking to a telemarketer rather than her husband's mother. "Hi, Jessica, it's Margaret. Is David there?" I wanted to ask about his birthday plans. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then she said, "Oh, Margaret. David's at work. We're just having a small family dinner. Nothing big." Something in her tone made my stomach clench. "Well, what time should I come? Should I bring anything?" Another pause. This one felt like falling into a dark pit. "Actually, Margaret, we're keeping it really small this year. Just immediate family." Immediate family. The words hit me like a subway train. I was David's mother. I had carried him for 9 months, raised him alone after his father left when David was 8. I had worked double shifts at the diner to put him through college, had given him my life savings when he started his consulting business, had watched his children every weekend for years when he and Jessica wanted their couple time. But apparently, I wasn't immediate family. "I see," I whispered into the phone, though I didn't see anything clearly anymore. The next day, my neighbor Sarah knocked on my door with a cup of tea and a concerned expression. Sarah is one of those rare souls who still believes in kindness. She's a retired teacher, maybe 65, with silver hair that catches the light and eyes that actually see you when she looks at you. "Margaret, honey, you look pale. Everything all right?" I let her in because the silence in my apartment was becoming louder than the subway. We sat on my old sofa, the one I'd reupholstered twice to make it last, and I told her about the phone call. "That doesn't sound right," Sarah said, frowning. "Family is family." That evening, unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, I decided to walk to the restaurant Jessica had mentioned once, Mateo's on the Upper East Side. It was David's favorite place, where they took clients, where they celebrated special occasions. The place I'd never been invited to in all my years as his mother. The restaurant glowed with warm light, and through the large windows, I could see them. My son, my daughter-in-law, my grandchildren, Jessica's parents, her sister, her brother-in-law, their children. A long table filled with laughter, champagne glasses raised in toasts, a birthday cake with candles being blown out. I stood on that sidewalk for 20 minutes, watching my family celebrate without me. The snow began to fall, collecting on my shoulders like cold tears. That's when I saw Jessica look toward the window. Our eyes met for just a moment through the glass. She said something to the others, and they all turned to look. My son, my baby boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, saw me standing there in the snow. And he turned away. Jessica got up from the table. I thought maybe, just maybe, she was coming to invite me in, to apologize for the misunderstanding. Instead, she came outside, her designer coat draped over her shoulders like armor. "Margaret, what are you doing here?" "It's David's birthday," I said, my voice barely audible over the traffic. "We told you it was family only." "I am family, Jessica. I'm his mother." She looked at me the way you might look at a stray dog that's following you home. "Margaret, we didn't save a seat for your mom. We planned this dinner carefully. David needs space to enjoy his birthday without." She paused, searching for words that would cut deep enough to make me leave. "Without the drama." Drama. 27 years of raising David alone. Drama. Working 3 jobs to pay for his college. Drama. Giving him $20,000 from my retirement savings when his business almost failed. Drama. Babysitting Emma and Jake every weekend for 5 years while they built their careers. Drama. I understand, I said, though understanding felt like drowning. She went back inside. Through the window, I watched her sit down and lean toward David, whispering something that made him nod and reach for her hand. The birthday celebration continued. The champagne flowed. The laughter echoed against the glass like mockery. I walked back to Queens that night, 45 minutes in the snow, because I couldn't afford the taxi and somehow the subway felt too fast, too final. I needed time to process what had just happened. I needed time to understand how 27 years of being a mother had led to standing alone in the snow, watching my son blow out birthday candles I wasn't allowed to see lit. When I got home, my apartment felt smaller than ever. I sat on my bed and looked at the pictures on my nightstand. David at his high school graduation, grinning as he held up his diploma. David at his college graduation, his arm around me, both of us beaming with pride. David on his wedding day, looking handsome in his tuxedo as I adjusted his bow tie one last time before he walked down the aisle. When had I become someone who wasn't worth saving a seat for? The answer, I realized, had been building for years. It hadn't started with the restaurant. It had started with small things, tiny cuts that had added up to a wound too deep to ignore anymore. It started 3 years ago, when Emma had her school play and I wasn't told about it until the day after. "Oh, we forgot to mention it," Jessica had said with that smooth voice of hers. It was such a small production. It continued with Christmas dinners where I was asked to bring the side dishes but wasn't included in any of the planning. Where I sat at the far end of the table, next to Jake's booster seat, while Jessica's parents held court at the other end, regaling everyone with stories of their cruise to Italy and their new house in the Hamptons. It grew stronger when I got pneumonia 2 winters ago and called David to ask if he could pick up some groceries for me. "Mom, we're so busy with the kids' soccer tournament this weekend. Maybe you could ask one of your neighbors?" One of my neighbors. As if I had a village of people waiting to help me, instead of Sarah and Mrs. Chen and maybe old Mr. Rodriguez from 3B who sometimes helped me carry my laundry up the stairs. But I had adapted. I had told myself that this was normal, that families grow and change, that I needed to be understanding. I had swallowed the hurt and continued showing up, continued giving, continued trying to earn my place at a table that seemed to have no room for me. The morning after David's birthday, I called him. He answered on the 5th ring, his voice heavy with what sounded like guilt or annoyance. "Hi, Mom. David, I need to understand what happened last night. Mom, please don't make this a big thing. Jessica planned a nice dinner, and we wanted to keep it small." "Small? Your wife's entire family was there. Her parents, her siblings, her nephews and nieces. How was that small?" He sighed, and in that sigh I heard 27 years of my love being reduced to an inconvenience. "Mom, you have to understand. Jessica's family they're different. They're used to certain types of occasions." "What does that mean?" "It means they're used to nice restaurants and certain conversations. They don't understand your stories about the diner or your complaints about the landlord or your health problems. Certain types of occasions. Certain conversations." I felt something inside my chest crack open like ice in spring. "David, are you ashamed of me?" The pause was so long I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. "Mom, don't be dramatic. It's not about shame. It's about fit. You don't always fit." I hung up the phone. Not dramatically, not with anger, but with the quiet resignation of someone who had finally heard the truth spoken out loud. Sarah found me that afternoon sitting on the bench outside our building, staring at nothing. "Oh, honey," she said, settling down beside me. "You look like your world just ended." "Maybe it did," I said. She took my hand in hers. Her hands were warm and soft, hands that had held hundreds of children's hands over decades of teaching, hands that knew how to give comfort without expecting anything in return. "Tell me what happened." So I did. I told her about the phone call, about standing in the snow, about Jessica's words, about David's explanation. As I spoke, I felt like I was performing surgery on myself, cutting out pieces of my heart to examine them in the light. "Margaret," Sarah said when I finished, "how long has this been going on?" "I don't know. Years, maybe. But I thought if I just tried harder, if I gave more, if I asked for less." "Oh, sweetheart. You've been trying to buy love with pieces of yourself." The truth of her words hit me like a physical blow. I had been buying love. With money, with babysitting, with cooking, with cleaning, with silence when I should have spoken up, with acceptance when I should have demanded respect. That evening, alone in my apartment, I did something I hadn't done in years. I took out a notebook and made a list. Not a grocery list or a to-do list, but a list of everything I had given David and his family over the past 5 years. The $20,000 for his business. The countless hours of babysitting. The Christmas gifts that had depleted my savings. The dinners I'd cooked and delivered when Jessica was tired. The cleaning I'd done when they hosted parties. The times I'd taken Emma and Jake when they were sick so David and Jessica didn't have to miss work. And then I made another list. The invitations I hadn't received. The phone calls that went unreturned. The birthdays they forgot. The holidays I spent alone. The times I was sick and no one checked on me. The moments when I was made to feel like a burden rather than a blessing. The second list was longer than the first. I sat there in my kitchen, surrounded by these lists, and felt something I hadn't felt in decades: rage. Not the quick burst of anger that comes and goes, but deep, steady rage at being taken for granted. At being used. At being discarded when I was no longer convenient. How had I let this happen? When had I stopped being David's mother and become his ATM? The answer came to me slowly, painfully. It had started when he got married. Jessica had been polite at first, even warm. But gradually, subtly, she had begun to create distance. A comment here about how different our backgrounds were. A suggestion there about how I might dress better for family photos. A gentle redirection when I told stories about David's childhood that didn't match the narrative she preferred. And David had let her. He had chosen her comfort over my dignity, her approval over my feelings. He had rewritten our history to fit their present. I remembered the David who used to call me every Sunday just to talk. Who would show up at my apartment with Chinese takeout when he sensed I was lonely? Who would hug me tight and say, "Thanks for everything, Mom. I don't know what I would have done without you." Where had that David gone? When had he been replaced by this stranger who was embarrassed by my presence? The next few weeks passed in a fog of revelation and grief. I found myself noticing things I had trained myself to ignore. The way Jessica's voice changed when she spoke to me versus when she spoke to her own mother. The way David would check his phone when I was talking, as if my words were interrupting something more important. The way my grandchildren had started treating me, politely, distantly, like a visiting relative they barely knew instead of the grandmother who had rocked them to sleep countless nights. I started declining their requests. When Jessica called to ask if I could babysit so they could go to a wedding, I said I had plans. When David mentioned needing help with a down payment for a new car, I changed the subject. When they invited me to Jake's basketball game, an invitation that came the day before, clearly an afterthought, I said I couldn't make it. The shift in their behavior was immediate and revealing. Suddenly, David was calling more often. Jessica was being friendlier. The invitations became more frequent, though no less last minute. "Mom, we miss you," David said during one of these calls. "You seem so distant lately." Distant. I almost laughed at the irony. "I'm right here, David," I said. "I've always been right here." But I wasn't right there anymore, not in the way I had been. For the first time in years, I was putting myself first. I was sleeping better, eating regular meals instead of skipping them to save money for David's family. I was reading books I'd been meaning to get to, taking walks around the neighborhood, actually noticing the seasons change. Sarah and I had started having coffee together every Tuesday morning. She would tell me stories about her students, about the books she was reading, about the travels she was planning. In return, I found myself talking about things I hadn't thought about in years, my dreams when I was young, the places I'd wanted to visit, the hobbies I'd given up when motherhood took over my life. "Margaret," she said one Tuesday, "you seem lighter." She was right. I felt like I'd been carrying a heavy suitcase for so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to walk without the weight. But the real test came at Easter. Jessica called me 2 days before Easter Sunday. Her voice was bright and cheerful, the way it got when she wanted something. "Margaret, how are you? We're having Easter brunch this year, and we'd love for you to join us." 2 days' notice. For Easter. The holiday when families come together, when children hunt for eggs and everyone wears their best clothes and takes pictures that will become memories. "What time?" I asked, though I already knew what I was going to say. 11 o'clock. "And could you bring your famous coffee cake?" Emma specifically asked for Grandma Maggie's coffee cake. Emma specifically asked. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost insulting. Emma was 8 years old. She ate whatever was put in front of her and hadn't mentioned my coffee cake in over a year. "I'm sorry, Jessica, but I can't make it." The silence on the other end of the phone was profound. "You can't make it? To Easter?" "No, I have other plans." It wasn't true, not entirely. My plans consisted of sleeping late, reading a novel, maybe taking a walk in the park. But they were my plans, and they mattered to me. "But it's Easter, Margaret. It's family." There was that word again. Family. The word they used when they needed something from me, but forgot when they were making their guest lists. "I understand it's Easter," I said calmly. "I hope you all have a wonderful time." I hung up before she could respond. Within an hour, David called. Mom, what's going on? Jessica said you're not coming to Easter. That's right. But why? Are you sick? Are you upset about something? I considered my answer carefully. I could have explained everything, the years of feeling excluded, the birthday dinner, the pattern of being taken for granted. But I realized that if I had to explain it, then he would never truly understand it. I have other plans, David. What plans? Mom, this is family time. Yes, it is. And my family is apparently not a priority for you until you need something from me. The words came out more sharply than I intended, but they felt true and clean and necessary. Mom, that's not fair. Isn't it? When was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you invited me somewhere without asking me to bring something or do something? When was the last time I felt like your mother instead of your employee? He didn't have an answer. I need some space, David. I need some time to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to earn my place in your life. I hung up feeling shaky but oddly exhilarated, like I'd just jumped off a high dive and was still falling through the air. Easter Sunday, I woke up naturally for the first time in months, no alarm, no anxiety about what needed to be done or who needed to be pleased. I made myself a proper breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, fresh coffee. I ate it slowly, tasting every bite, sitting at my small table with the morning light coming through my window. I thought about all the Easter mornings I'd spent rushing around, preparing elaborate brunches for David's family, arriving early to help set up, staying late to clean up, giving and giving until I was exhausted and invisible. This Easter morning, I belonged entirely to myself. But the hardest part was yet to come. A week after Easter, David showed up at my apartment. He looked tired, older somehow, standing in my doorway with his hands in his pockets like the guilty child he used to be when he'd broken something. Can I come in, Mom? I let him in, but I didn't offer coffee or cookies or any of the small gestures of welcome I used to make automatically. He sat on my sofa, looking around the apartment as if he were seeing it for the first time. Maybe he was. When was the last time he'd really been here, not just stopping by to pick something up or ask for something? Mom, I've been thinking about what you said. I waited. Jessica and we got used to relying on you. Maybe too much. Still waiting. And maybe we didn't always include you the way we should have. The understatement was so massive it was almost funny. David, I said quietly, do you remember your 10th birthday? He looked confused by the change of subject. Your 10th birthday, I continued. You wanted a bike, but I couldn't afford one. I worked extra shifts for 2 months to save up for it. I remember wrapping it up and putting it in the living room at midnight, and I was so excited to see your face in the morning. He nodded slowly. Do you remember what you said when you saw it? I said thank you. You said, Mom, this is the best present ever, and you're the best mom in the world. And then you hugged me so tight I thought my ribs might crack. His eyes were starting to fill with tears. When did I stop being the best mom in the world, David? When did I become someone you were embarrassed to have at your birthday dinner? The tears spilled over then, and for a moment he looked like that 10-year-old boy again. I don't know, Mom. I don't know when it happened. Jessica's family. They have money, and they do things differently, and somewhere along the way I started seeing our life through their eyes instead of my own. At least he was being honest. I started seeing you through their eyes, he continued. And I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I felt a crack in the wall I'd built around my heart, but I didn't let it crumble yet. Apologies were just words. Change required action. David, I need you to understand something. I'm not going to keep trying to earn my place in your life. Either I belong there or I don't. Either I'm your mother or I'm not. But I won't keep auditioning for a role that should be mine by right. He nodded through his tears. What can I do, Mom? How can I fix this? I had thought about this question for weeks. You can start by treating me like family instead of like hired help. You can include me in plans before the last minute. You can call me because you want to talk to me, not because you need something. You can remember that I'm Emma and Jake's grandmother, not their babysitter. Yes, absolutely. And David, you can stop being ashamed of where you came from. I worked 3 jobs to raise you. I lived on pasta and canned soup so you could have new school clothes. I gave up my dreams so you could chase yours. That's not something to be embarrassed about. That's something to be proud of. He was crying openly now, and I felt my own eyes fill with tears. I am proud of it, Mom. I am proud of you. I forgot for a while. I reached over and took his hand, the hand I used to hold when he was little and scared. Then remember. And don't forget again. Over the following weeks, things began to change slowly. David started calling on Sundays, just to talk. The conversations were awkward at first, like we were relearning how to be mother and son instead of creditor and debtor. But gradually, we found our rhythm again. Jessica's attitude took longer to shift. She was polite, even friendly, but I could tell she was testing me, waiting to see if I would slip back into my old role of giving everything and expecting nothing. The real test came in June, when Emma's birthday approached. 2 weeks before the party, David called with the invitation. Not Jessica, but David himself. "Mom, we're having Emma's party at that new indoor playground place. 2 o'clock on Saturday. We'd really like you to be there. 2 weeks' notice. A proper invitation. Progress. I'd love to come," I said. "Great. And Mom, you don't need to bring anything except yourself." Those words meant more to me than he could possibly know. The day of the party, I chose my outfit carefully. Not my usual attempt to dress up for Jessica's approval, but clothes that made me feel confident and comfortable. A bright blue blouse that brought out my eyes, pants that fit well, jewelry I'd been saving for special occasions. When I walked into that indoor playground, Emma ran to me with genuine excitement. "Grandma Maggie, you came." She hugged me like she meant it, and for the first time in years, I felt like a grandmother instead of an obligation. The party was different this time. I wasn't asked to help serve cake or clean up wrapping paper. I wasn't relegated to the far corner with the other grandparents. David made sure I was included in conversations. He introduced me to other parents as my mom with pride in his voice instead of reluctance. Jessica's transformation was the most surprising. She sat next to me during the cake ceremony and actually initiated conversation. "Margaret, that's a beautiful blouse. The color really suits you." It was such a simple comment, but it was the first time she'd complimented me on anything in years. Later, as we watched Emma and Jake play with their friends, Jessica said quietly, "I owe you an apology." I looked at her in surprise. I know I made things difficult. Between you and David. Between you and the kids. I thought I was protecting our family, but I realized I was just being selfish." It wasn't a complete apology. She didn't acknowledge the specific hurts or the years of exclusion, but it was a start. "We all make mistakes," I said, "because grace is sometimes more powerful than justice." That evening, as I rode the subway back to Queens, I looked at my reflection in the dark window and saw something I hadn't seen in years, a woman who knew her worth. A woman who had finally stopped apologizing for taking up space in her own life. The changes continued throughout the summer. David and Jessica started including me in more family activities, not always, and not without the occasional regression, but enough that I felt like I belonged again. Emma and Jake started calling me more often, just to tell me about their days or to share silly jokes they'd heard at school. But the most important change was in me. I had learned to say no without guilt. I had learned to ask for what I needed instead of hoping someone would notice I needed it. I had learned that love given freely is beautiful, but love demanded as payment is not love at all. Sarah noticed the change immediately. "You're different," she said during one of our Tuesday coffee dates. "Stronger. More yourself." She was right. For the first time in decades, I felt like myself, not David's mother, not Jessica's mother-in-law, not Emma and Jake's grandmother, but Margaret. A complete person with her own thoughts, desires, and boundaries. I started taking art classes at the community center. I had always loved to draw when I was younger, but had given it up when life got busy and children got expensive. Now, every Thursday evening, I sat in that bright classroom with a dozen other adults, learning to see the world through artists' eyes. My instructor, Marcus, was a patient black man in his 50s who had the gift of making everyone feel talented. "Don't worry about making it perfect," he would say as we sketched still lives or attempted portraits. "Worry about making it true." Making it true. I carried those words with me everywhere. I also started volunteering at the Literacy Center, helping adults learn to read. There is something profound about watching a 40-year-old woman sound out her first sentence, or seeing a grandfather write his own name for the first time. It reminded me that it's never too late to change your story. But the biggest change came in how I saw my past. Instead of a series of sacrifices and disappointments, I began to see it as a story of resilience and love. I had raised a good man, even if he had lost his way for a while. I had given my grandchildren a foundation of unconditional love that would stay with them forever. I had survived poverty and abandonment and loneliness, and I had done it with my dignity intact. Well, mostly intact. There were still hard days. In September, David's business went through another rough patch. For the first time in decades, he didn't call me asking for money. Instead, he called to tell me what was happening and to ask for my advice. "I don't want you to worry about us financially, Mom," he said. "Jessica and I are going to figure this out together. But I wanted you to know what was going on, and I wanted to ask what you think I should do." The old Margaret would have immediately offered to help, would have depleted her savings account again to fix his problems. The new Margaret listened, offered emotional support, and kept her checkbook closed. "You're smart and capable, David. You'll find a way through this." "Thanks, Mom. I love you." "I love you too." It was a small conversation, but it represented a seismic shift in our relationship. He was treating me like a mother instead of a bank, and I was behaving like a mother instead of an enabler. October brought my 73rd birthday. I didn't mention it to David, wanting to see if he would remember on his own. 2 days before the date, he called. "Mom, what do you want to do for your birthday?" Not, "We should probably do something for your birthday," or "Jessica thinks we should have you over for dinner." But, "What do you want to do?" "I'd like to go to that new Italian restaurant in the village," I said. "The one with the good reviews." "Perfect. I'll make a reservation for all of us." "Actually, David, I'd like it to be just you and me. If that's okay." There was a pause, but not the uncomfortable kind. The thoughtful kind. "I'd like that too, Mom." We met at the restaurant on a crisp October evening. David looked handsome in his navy blazer, and for a moment I saw echoes of the little boy who used to dress up for our special mother-son dates. We talked for 3 hours. Really talked. He told me about his work stress, his fears about being a good father, his struggles to balance Jessica's family expectations with his own values. I told him about my art classes, my volunteer work, the book I was reading about women who changed careers after 70. "Mom," he said as we shared a piece of tiramisu for dessert, "I'm proud of you." Proud of me. For standing up to us. For demanding better treatment. For showing me that you're not just my mother, but a person with your own life and dreams. I felt tears start to well up in my eyes. "It took me too long to learn that lesson," I said. "Maybe. But you learned it. And you taught it to me too." As we walked out of the restaurant together, David linked his arm through mine the way he used to when he was a teenager and still thought his mother was pretty cool. "Next year," he said, "let's plan something really special for your birthday. Maybe a weekend trip somewhere you've always wanted to go." "I'd like that," I said, and I meant it. The holidays that year were different. I was included in the planning, not just the execution. Christmas dinner was at my apartment, my suggestion, which was accepted immediately and enthusiastically. For the first time in years, I controlled the menu, the timing, the guest list. Jessica actually asked if she could help with the cooking. We spent Christmas Eve afternoon in my small kitchen, preparing dishes and talking about Emma's school performance and Jake's latest obsession with dinosaurs. It wasn't the deep, healing conversation I sometimes imagined having with her, but it was companionable and warm. Emma and Jake helped me set the table, using the good china I'd been saving for special occasions. As we arranged the plates and glasses, Emma said, "Grandma Maggie, I like it better when Christmas is at your house." "Why is that, sweetheart?" "Because you make it feel more cozy. More like a home." Out of the mouths of babes. Christmas dinner was everything I had dreamed it could be. David carved the turkey with theatrical flourish, making Emma and Jake giggle. Jessica actually complimented my stuffing recipe and asked for it to take home. We played charades after dinner, and for the first time in years, I felt like part of the family instead of a guest in my own life. But life is never a straight line, and there was one more test waiting for me. In February, I got sick. Not seriously, just a bad case of the flu that left me weak and dizzy. I called David to let him know I might not be able to babysit that weekend as planned. "Mom, forget about babysitting. Are you okay? Do you need anything?" Within an hour, David was at my door with groceries, medicine, and homemade soup that Jessica had insisted on making. "You don't have to do all this," I said, though I was touched by their concern. "Mom, you're sick. Of course we're going to take care of you." Over the next few days, they took turns checking on me. David brought more soup and helped me organize my medications. Jessica sent Emma and Jake over with get-well cards they had made at the kitchen table. Even Jake, who was only 6, had drawn a picture of me in bed with a smile on my face and the words, "Get better soon Grandma Maggie," in his careful kindergarten handwriting. The care they showed me during those few days meant more than all the birthday dinners and holiday invitations combined. This was what family looked like when it was working properly. This was love in action, not just in words. By spring, I had settled into a new rhythm. I was still David's mother, still Emma and Jake's grandmother, but I was also Margaret, artist, volunteer, friend, individual. I had learned to take up space without apologizing, to give love without expecting payment, to receive care without feeling guilty. Sarah and I took a weekend trip to the Finger Lakes, staying in a charming bed and breakfast and visiting local wineries. It was the first vacation I had taken in 15 years, and I felt giddy with the freedom of it. We talked and laughed and took terrible selfies with the vineyard views in the background. "To new adventures," Sarah said, raising her glass of Riesling. "To new adventures," I agreed, and I meant it. One evening in May, as I sat on the small balcony of my Queens apartment watching the sunset paint the Manhattan skyline in shades of gold and pink, I thought about the woman who had stood outside that restaurant in the snow just 18 months earlier. That woman had felt invisible, worthless, forgotten. She had measured her value by how much others needed her, and when they stopped needing her, or started taking her for granted, she had crumbled. This woman, the one sitting on the balcony with a glass of wine and a heart full of hard-earned peace, knew her worth was not dependent on anyone else's recognition of it. She had learned that respect is not earned through sacrifice alone, but through self-respect first and foremost. David called while I was sitting there, just as the last light was fading from the sky. "Hi, Mom. How was your day?" "It was good. I finished a painting in my art class, and I helped a woman at the literacy center read her first complete paragraph." "That's wonderful. I'm proud of you." Those words, which he now said regularly, still had the power to warm me from the inside out. "David," I said, "can I tell you something?" "Of course. Thank you for fighting for us. For fighting for our relationship. It would have been easier to let me drift away, to let the distance grow until we were strangers. But you didn't. You fought to bring me back into the family, and I'm grateful." "Mom," he said, and I could hear the emotion in his voice, "thank you for not giving up on me. For loving me enough to demand better from me. I know it wasn't easy." "No," I agreed. "It wasn't. But you were worth it. You've always been worth it." After we hung up, I sat in the growing darkness and felt a profound sense of completion. Not the completion that comes at the end of a story, but the completion that comes when all the pieces finally fit together properly. I had learned that love without boundaries is not love at all, it's addiction. I had learned that giving everything doesn't guarantee receiving anything. I had learned that sometimes you have to refuse to be taken for granted before people remember to grant you respect. Most importantly, I had learned that it's never too late to rewrite your story. At 73, I had discovered that I was not just a supporting character in other people's lives, but the protagonist of my own. The woman who had once stood in the snow, watching her family celebrate without her, had transformed into a woman who knew that celebrations without her love were empty indeed. But she had also learned that her love was not diminished by their inability to properly receive it at first. But there's more to this story, and I think you need to hear it all. Because the journey of reclaiming your worth doesn't end with one conversation or one changed dynamic. It's an ongoing process, with setbacks and triumphs, moments of doubt and moments of clarity. A year after that conversation on my balcony, something happened that tested everything I thought I had learned about boundaries and family dynamics. Jessica's mother, Patricia, was diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer. The news came on a Tuesday morning while I was getting ready for my art class. David called, his voice tight with stress. "Mom, Patricia is going to need surgery and several months of treatment. Jessica is a wreck. The kids are scared. I don't know how we're going to manage everything." My first instinct, deeply ingrained after decades of being the family's solution to every crisis, was to immediately offer my help. To drop everything, cancel my commitments, and step in to fill whatever gaps needed filling. But I had learned to pause. I had learned to think before responding, to consider what was being asked of me and what I was capable of giving without sacrificing my own well-being. "I'm sorry to hear about Patricia," I said. "That must be frightening for everyone." "It is. And Jessica, she's going to need so much support. Someone to help with the kids when she's driving her mom to appointments, someone to cook meals, someone to stay with Patricia after the surgery." There it was. The unspoken request. The assumption that I would step in and carry the load, as I always had. "David," I said carefully, "what exactly are you asking me to do?" There was a pause, and I could hear him processing the fact that I hadn't immediately volunteered to solve everything. I guess I assumed you'd want to help. That you'd offer to pitch in however you could." "I do want to help," I said. "But I need to know what specific help you're asking for, and I need to think about what I can realistically do." Another pause, longer this time. "Mom, are you saying you might not help us?" The hurt in his voice was real, and it tugged at my heartstrings in the old familiar way. But I had learned to distinguish between hurt that came from genuine need and hurt that came from disappointed expectations of unlimited giving. "I'm saying I want to help in ways that are sustainable for me and genuinely helpful for Patricia and your family. But I'm not going to sacrifice my health, my commitments, or my peace of mind to solve this crisis." That evening, Jessica called. Her voice was thick with tears and exhaustion. "Margaret, I don't know what to do. Mom is so scared, and I feel like I'm falling apart. David said you might not be able to help us, and I can't do this alone." My heart broke for her genuine fear and vulnerability. This wasn't the manipulative Jessica who excluded me from birthday dinners. This was a daughter terrified of losing her mother. "Jessica," I said gently, "I didn't say I couldn't help. I said I wanted to understand what kind of help would be most useful." "Oh." She sounded surprised, as if the idea of asking what I could do instead of assuming I would do everything hadn't occurred to her. Over the next few days, we had several conversations about what support would look like. Jessica's family had resources, money for private nursing care, a network of friends who could provide meals, relatives who could help with transportation. What they needed wasn't someone to carry the entire burden, but someone to provide emotional support and occasional practical help. I agreed to babysit Emma and Jake twice a week while Jessica took Patricia to appointments. I offered to cook one meal per week that could be frozen and reheated when needed. I said I would visit Patricia once a week to provide companionship and a listening ear. But I also maintained my boundaries. I wouldn't cancel my art classes or volunteer work. I wouldn't be available for last-minute requests without advance notice. I wouldn't take on more than I had explicitly agreed to do. The difference in how this crisis unfolded compared to how previous family emergencies had been handled was remarkable. Because I had been clear about what I could and couldn't do, everyone else had to step up and take responsibility. David arranged his work schedule to be more flexible. Jessica's sister flew in from California to help for 2 weeks. Patricia's friends organized a meal train that didn't depend on my contributions. Most importantly, because I wasn't overwhelmed and resentful from giving beyond my capacity, the help I did provide was given freely and joyfully. When I cooked soup for Patricia, it was because I wanted to nourish her, not because it was expected. When I played board games with Emma and Jake, it was because I enjoyed their company, not because I was fulfilling an obligation. Patricia's surgery went well, and her recovery was steady. During one of my weekly visits, as we sat in her elegantly appointed living room drinking tea from her good china, she said something that surprised me. "Margaret, I owe you an apology." I looked up from my teacup, curious. "I've never treated you as an equal," she continued. "I've always looked down on you because you don't have the education or the money or the social connections that I do. I taught Jessica to see you the same way." Her honesty was startling and a little painful, but there was also relief in finally having someone acknowledge what I had felt for years. "I'm not proud of it," Patricia went on. "And seeing you during this crisis, the way you've helped without martyring yourself, the way you've been kind without being doormat, has made me realize how wrong I was." "We all make judgments," I said. "What matters is that we're willing to reconsider them." "You're a stronger woman than I am," Patricia said quietly. "I don't think I would have handled being excluded and dismissed the way you were with such grace." It was the closest thing to a full acknowledgement of my treatment that I had ever received from Jessica's family. It didn't erase the years of feeling less than, but it was healing in its own way. Patricia's treatment lasted 6 months. During that time, something beautiful happened within our extended family. Because everyone had to contribute instead of relying on one person to carry the load, we all grew closer. David learned to cook basic meals for his family. Emma and Jake learned to be more independent and to help with household tasks. Jessica developed a deeper appreciation for the people in her life who showed up consistently. And I learned that I could be genuinely helpful and loving without losing myself in the process. The summer after Patricia finished her treatment, our family took its first real vacation together. Not a weekend visit or a holiday gathering, but an actual planned vacation, a week in a rented house at the Jersey Shore. David suggested it during one of our Sunday phone calls. "Mom, what would you think about all of us, you, me, Jessica, the kids, even Patricia if she's feeling up to it, renting a house at the shore this summer?" "That sounds wonderful," I said, and I meant it. "Great. I'll start looking for places. Do you have any preferences about the area or the type of house?" The fact that he asked for my input instead of presenting me with completed plans felt like another small miracle. When the week arrived, I packed carefully. Not the minimal, practical wardrobe I used to bring to family events, but clothes I loved wearing, books I wanted to read, art supplies for painting the ocean views. The house David had chosen was perfect, large enough for everyone to have space, but cozy enough to encourage togetherness. It had a wraparound porch where we could sit and watch the sunset, a kitchen big enough for multiple people to cook together, and easy access to a beautiful stretch of beach. That week was a revelation for all of us. Without the pressures of daily life, work deadlines, school schedules, household responsibilities, we relaxed into simply enjoying each other's company. Emma and I spent hours building elaborate sandcastles, complete with moats and towers and tiny shell decorations. Jake taught me to play his favorite card game, patiently explaining the rules multiple times until I caught on. David and I took long walks along the water's edge every morning, talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes Jessica joined us, and gradually our conversations moved beyond polite pleasantries to real sharing about hopes and fears and memories. One evening, as we all sat on the porch watching Emma and Jake catch fireflies in the gathering dusk, Jessica said, "This is what I want for our family. This feeling of everyone belonging, everyone mattering. It's nice, isn't it?" I said, "It is. And Margaret, I know it took me a long time to understand what you brought to our family. I'm glad I finally figured it out." It wasn't a dramatic apology or a tearful reconciliation. It was something better, a quiet acknowledgement of value given and received. That week, Patricia told me stories about her own mother, a woman who had worked as a seamstress to support her family during the Depression. As she talked, I realized that her initial dismissal of me might have come, at least partly, from her own complicated feelings about her working-class background. I spent so many years trying to distance myself from my mother's life, Patricia admitted as we watched the kids play in the surf. I thought having money and education made me better than people who didn't have those things. But watching you with Emma and Jake, seeing how much they adore you, reminds me of what really matters. On our last evening at the shore, as we packed up the cars and cleaned the house, Emma hugged me tightly and said, "Grandma Maggie, can we do this again next year?" "I hope so, sweetheart. Promise?" I looked around at this family, my family, and felt a deep sense of contentment. I promised to do my best to make it happen. As we drove back to Queens that evening, I thought about how much had changed since that snowy night outside the restaurant. I had gone from being excluded from birthday celebrations to being included in vacation planning. I had gone from being taken for granted to being genuinely valued. Most importantly, I had gone from giving compulsively out of fear of abandonment to giving freely out of love. But perhaps the most significant change was internal. I had learned to see myself as worthy of love and respect, not because of what I could do for others, but because of who I was. I had learned to set boundaries not as walls to keep people out, but as fences that created healthy spaces for relationships to flourish. The autumn after our shore vacation, I faced another test of these hard-earned lessons. Sarah, my dear friend and neighbor, was diagnosed with dementia. The diagnosis came gradually, through a series of small incidents that we initially dismissed as normal aging. Forgotten appointments, repeated conversations, difficulty managing her finances. But when she got lost coming home from the grocery store, a route she had walked for 20 years, we knew something was seriously wrong. As Sarah's condition progressed, she needed increasing amounts of support. Help with grocery shopping, reminders to take medication, someone to ensure she didn't leave the stove on or the water running. My first instinct was to become her primary caregiver. To take on the overwhelming job of managing her care, just as I had once taken on the overwhelming job of solving every problem for David's family. But I caught myself. I had learned the difference between loving someone and losing yourself in their needs. Instead of trying to handle everything myself, I organized. I researched resources for people with dementia. I connected Sarah with a social worker who could help navigate the system of supports available to her. I coordinated with her nephew in Portland to ensure he was informed and involved in her care decisions. I agreed to specific, manageable ways to help, checking on Sarah every morning, preparing one meal per week that she could easily reheat, helping her organize her medications into daily pill containers. But I also recognized that Sarah needed more professional support than I could provide. When Sarah moved into an assisted living facility that specialized in memory care, I visited her twice a week. Sometimes she remembered me clearly, and we would talk about art and books and shared memories. Sometimes she didn't recognize me at all, but seemed comforted by my presence. The hardest part wasn't Sarah's confusion, it was letting go of the belief that if I just tried hard enough, gave enough, sacrificed enough, I could fix everything for everyone I loved. During one visit, Sarah was having a particularly clear day. We sat in the facility's garden, watching other residents tend to raised flower beds. "Margaret," she said suddenly, "I'm proud of you." "Proud of me for what, Sarah?" "For learning to love people without losing yourself. I used to worry about you, you know. You gave so much of yourself away that I was afraid there wouldn't be anything left." Her words brought tears to my eyes, partly because of their kindness, and partly because I knew this might be one of the last times she would remember me clearly. "You taught me a lot about that, Sarah. About loving people while still loving myself." She smiled and patted my hand with her soft, age-spotted fingers. "Good. That's the most important lesson anyone can learn." Sarah died peacefully in her sleep 6 months later. Her funeral was small but meaningful. Her nephew from Portland, a few neighbors from our building, some staff members from the assisted living facility who had grown fond of her, and me. As I sat in that chapel listening to the minister talk about Sarah's life as a teacher, her dedication to literacy, her kindness to neighbors, I realized that she had taught me one final lesson. She had shown me what it looks like to receive care gracefully, to accept help without shame, to maintain dignity even in vulnerability, to let people love you without feeling obligated to earn that love. After the service, Sarah's nephew approached me. "Aunt Sarah talked about you all the time," he said. "She said you were like the sister she never had. Thank you for being such a good friend to her." "She was a good friend to me too," I said, and I meant it deeply. Standing in that parking lot after Sarah's funeral, I felt something I had never experienced before, the certainty that I had loved someone well. Not perfectly, not without boundaries or limits, but well. Generously, consistently, sustainably. That evening, alone in my apartment, I called David. "Hi, Mom," he answered on the first ring. "How are you doing? I know today was hard." The fact that he remembered, that he was checking on my emotional state without being prompted, still amazed me sometimes. "I'm sad, but okay," I said. "Sarah lived a good life, and she died peacefully. Not everyone gets that gift. Still, it's hard to lose someone you care about." We talked for a while about Sarah, about death and friendship and what it means to age with dignity. As our conversation wound down, David said something that surprised me. "Mom, would you ever consider moving closer to us?" "Closer to you? Why?" "Well, you're 75 now. And after watching Patricia go through her health crisis, and now with Sarah's death, I just think it would be nice if we were closer. Not in the same house or anything," he added quickly. "But maybe a place in our neighborhood? There are some nice senior living communities that aren't too expensive." I was quiet for a moment, thinking. 5 years ago, such an invitation would have felt like validation, proof that I was finally valued enough to be wanted nearby. But now, I heard it differently. I heard genuine care, not obligation. I heard a son who wanted to be able to check on his mother, not a son who felt guilty about neglecting her. "Let me think about it," I said. "It's a big decision." "Of course. There's no pressure. I just wanted you to know that we'd love to have you closer." After we hung up, I sat in my small apartment thinking about the life I had built for myself in Queens. My art classes at the community center, my volunteer work at the literacy center, my familiarity with the neighborhood and the people in it. But I also thought about the reality of aging. About the practical benefits of living close to family who cared about me. About the possibility of being even more involved in Emma and Jake's lives as they grew up. Over the next few weeks, I visited several senior living communities in David's area. I was impressed by what I found, places that felt more like small neighborhoods than institutions, with opportunities for activities and socialization, but also privacy and independence. The community that appealed to me most was called Maplewood Gardens. It had a mix of independent apartments and assisted living units, so residents could transition between levels of care as their needs changed. There was an art studio where residents could take classes or work on individual projects. There was a library with a reading program for local elementary schools. There was a garden where residents could tend their own small plots. Most appealing to me was the sense of community I observed during my visit. People knew each other's names, looked out for one another, but also respected each other's autonomy. The apartment I could afford was smaller than my Queen's place, but it was bright and modern, with large windows that let in plenty of natural light. There was a small balcony where I could sit and read, and enough wall space to display my artwork. Still, the decision felt enormous. I was contemplating leaving the only home I had known for 20 years, the neighborhood where I had built my independent life. I talked it over with Marcus, my art instructor, during one of our classes. "Change is always scary," he said as we cleaned our brushes at the end of class. "But it sounds like you'd be moving towards something, not running away from something. That's usually a good sign." "I'm just worried I'll lose myself again," I admitted. "That being closer to David and his family will make me slip back into old habits." Marcus considered this thoughtfully. "Margaret, you're not the same person you were 5 years ago. You know who you are now. You know your worth. That doesn't change based on geography." He was right. The woman considering this move was not the same woman who had once sacrificed everything for crumbs of inclusion. This woman knew how to maintain relationships while maintaining herself. I made the decision on a snowy February day, almost exactly 5 years after that night outside the restaurant. I was sitting in my apartment, looking at the photo albums I had been organizing, when I realized something important. The memories that mattered most weren't tied to this particular apartment or this particular neighborhood. They were tied to relationships, with David, with Emma and Jake, with Sarah, who was gone now, with the people I had met through my art classes and volunteer work. Those relationships could be maintained and deepened regardless of where I lived. In fact, some of them might flourish more if I were closer to the people I loved. I called David that evening. "I've decided I'd like to move closer to you," I said. "If the offer is still open." "Really? Mom, that's wonderful." "Yes, of course it's still open. What changed your mind?" "I realized that home isn't a place," I said. "It's wherever the people you love can find you." The move happened in May, just as the spring flowers were blooming in Maplewood Gardens' landscaped courtyards. David, Jessica, Emma, and Jake all helped with the packing and moving. Even Patricia, fully recovered from her treatment, came to help organize my new kitchen. As we unpacked boxes and arranged furniture, I was struck by how different this felt from previous family interactions. Everyone was working together, but no one was taking over or telling me how things should be done. When Jessica suggested a different arrangement for my living room furniture, she framed it as a suggestion, not a directive. When Patricia organized my spice cabinet, she asked first if I wanted her help. Most importantly, I felt free to make my own decisions about my new space. When David suggested I might want to get rid of some of my older furniture and buy new pieces, I told him I preferred to keep the things that had meaning for me. When Jessica offered to buy new curtains for my bedroom, I declined politely and hung the ones I had brought from Queens. "It's your home, Mom," David said as we stood back and surveyed the completed apartment. "It should look like you." And it did look like me. My photographs covered the walls, my books filled the shelves, my art supplies were organized in the corner I had designated as my creative space. It felt familiar and comfortable, despite being in a new place. The transition to living at Maplewood Gardens was gentler than I had expected. The other residents were welcoming without being intrusive. I joined the art group, which met twice a week in a sunny studio space. I volunteered to help with the children's reading program at the library. I planted tomatoes and marigolds in my assigned garden plot. Most importantly, I found the balance I had been seeking between independence and connection. I saw David and his family regularly, but not overwhelmingly. We had dinner together once a week, either at their house or at a restaurant. I attended Emma's soccer games and Jake's school concerts. I was included in family decisions and celebrations, but I also maintained my own social calendar and personal interests. The difference in my grandchildren was remarkable. Because I was nearby and available, but not constantly sacrificing my own needs to accommodate theirs, our relationship felt more natural and relaxed. Emma started stopping by my apartment after school once a week, just to talk and have a snack. Jake began asking me to help him with his art projects, since he knew I knew about that stuff. These interactions felt organic rather than forced, born out of genuine affection rather than obligation or guilt. 6 months after my move, David and I were having one of our regular Friday evening dinners at a local restaurant when he said something that brought tears to my eyes. "Mom, you seem so happy here. More relaxed than I've seen you in years." "I am happy," I said, and I realized it was completely true. "I have a confession to make," David continued. "When I first suggested you move closer to us, part of me was motivated by guilt. I felt bad about how we had treated you, and I thought having you nearby would somehow make up for it." I waited for him to continue. "But now I realize that having you close by isn't about making up for anything. It's about enjoying the relationship we have now. I like having dinner with you every week. I like that Emma and Jake can see you whenever they want. I like being able to check on you during bad weather or when you're not feeling well, not because I feel obligated to, but because I care about you." "I like those things too," I said. "I guess what I'm trying to say is, I'm glad you're my mom. Not because of what you do for us, but because of who you are." Those words I had waited decades to hear, finally came freely, without coercion or manipulation. They came from a son who had learned to see his mother as a complete person, not just a source of support and services. That night, lying in my comfortable bed in my bright apartment, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this place. It had been painful and messy and complicated. There had been moments when I thought relationships were irreparably broken, times when I doubted my own worth, periods when I wondered if demanding respect was selfish or wrong. But I had persevered. I had learned to love people without losing myself. I had discovered that boundaries, rather than creating distance, actually made deeper intimacy possible. I had found out that respect, once earned through self-respect, created space for genuine affection to flourish. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt profoundly grateful, not for the struggles I had endured, but for the strength I had discovered in myself. I had rewritten my story from one of sacrifice and resentment to one of love and boundaries. I had transformed from a woman who gave everything and received scraps to a woman who gave freely and was valued completely. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming through my bedroom windows and the sound of children playing in the courtyard below. I made coffee and sat on my small balcony, watching the world wake up around me. At 75, I was finally living the life I had always deserved, one where love flowed both ways, where my presence was celebrated rather than taken for granted, where I could give generously without depleting myself. It had taken me decades to learn that love without self-respect is not love at all. It had taken years of practice to maintain boundaries while keeping my heart open. But I had learned, and the learning had transformed not just me, but everyone around me. As I think about all of you listening to this story, I wonder how many of you recognize yourselves in my journey. How many of you have given until giving became expected? How many of you have tried to buy love with pieces of your soul? How many of you have stood in metaphorical snow, watching through windows at lives you helped build but weren't welcome to fully share? If my story sounds familiar, please know that change is possible at any age, in any circumstances. It's never too late to demand better treatment. It's never too late to remember your worth. It's never too late to teach people how to love you properly. The people who truly belong in your life will rise to meet your standards. They will learn to value what you offer instead of exploiting your generosity. They will celebrate your presence instead of taking it for granted. And if they don't? If they choose to walk away rather than treat you with respect, then they are making space for better relationships to enter your life. They are doing you a favor, even if it doesn't feel like it at the time. Your love is not a commodity to be purchased with good behavior. Your presence is not a privilege to be earned through sacrifice. You are worthy of relationships that nourish you as much as you nourish them. You are deserving of love that doesn't require you to shrink or hide or apologize for taking up space. Have you lived something like this? Have you ever stood where I stood, wondering when you became someone who wasn't worth saving a seat for? I would love to hear your story in the comments below. Sometimes the most healing thing we can do is realize we're not alone in our struggles. If this story has touched your heart, if it has reminded you of your own worth or given you courage to make changes in your own life, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Your support helps me continue sharing these stories that I believe can change lives. Remember, you are worthy of love that doesn't diminish you. You are worthy of family that includes you, not just when convenient. You are worthy of relationships that celebrate your presence, not just tolerate it. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And thank you for remembering that your story, whatever stage you're in, matters deeply. You matter deeply. Never forget that.